issues of fake news and disinformation. Moderating the session will be journalist and political commentator Cod Satrusayang. So I'll hand over to Cod to introduce our panel for the session.
That's not my name.
Oh, sorry, apologies.
But thank you.
Should I give someone my microphone?
Anjan, do you need one? Okay, there's still Gwen that's coming. we can wait till everyone's sort of in here. No pressure, guys. We're not waiting on. Okay. Hi, my name is Cod Satrusayang. I am a writer based here in Bangkok. I'm really glad to be moderating this panel with such a distinguished group of speakers, all of whom I am proud to call my colleagues. Thank you to Jakapong Villa Pisa and the amazing staff for putting this event on. I'm going to introduce each speaker briefly, and then I'm going to introduce the topic, and we're going to go for that. Please save your questions for the end of the talk if you have any. If you don't, then don't say anything at all. On my left is Anjan Sundaram. All right. Anjan is a author, former journalist, and critique of the human condition. An anti-imperialist as well. He did his schooling in the United States and the United Kingdom and spent a lot of time in Central Africa as a stringer for the Associated Press before starting to write his books and moving to this region of the world. Currently, he's in Cambodia, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, that's right. Next, we have Anjan Thitirat Thipsamritkul, who is a lecturer at the Department of International Law at Thammasat University. We're actually really lucky to have Anjan Thitirat because she literally arrived 24 hours ago from Australia where she was doing a fellowship on law. So really excited to have her here. And my last guest probably needs no introduction. It's Voranai, Vanijaka, who is a political and social commentator. That's what you call yourself these days? He's a journalist with a column and doing a bunch of stuff. He's doing a new media website that will be launching next month, if all goes well, called Disrupt, so be sure to check that out once it launches. That's Voranai. So today, we're here to talk about how the landscape of media in the 21st century has changed. It's changed for numerous reasons, but most important of all is the fact that the internet, Web 2.0, and social media has changed it irrevocably and in a way that cannot be returned to what it was before. Traditionally, over the course of the 20th century, the media played a key role as a gatekeeper of information, as a purveyor of news, obviously. So when you're consuming your news, if you live out west, journalists were your best bet at understanding the world. People like Gwen and Jonathan, who are in the audience today, would be where you went for the news. Now with the rise of social media, that is no longer the case. People go to Twitter and Facebook for their news, sometimes for the better because of the speed and veracity in which it's able to be transported, but sometimes it's not great because there has been rise of things like disinformation campaigns and fake news. So I'm going to invite Anjan to sort of open up and talk about his experiences, both as a stringer with the AP in Africa, about how technology has changed his role reporting from that region of the world, and what he thinks of our challenges in meeting fake news and disinformation in this day and age.
Sure, thanks, Cod. So I'm Anjan. I write books. I also present TV shows, and I guess one of the reasons I'm sitting here is because I just made a TV series called Coded World, or presented the series. We're going to screen an episode of that just after this, I believe, in the next room, an episode on freedom. So if I could, maybe I could sort of talk about the digital landscape first, because my work spans both digital landscape and journalism. And from making this series, perhaps the most important thing I learned was that we all have digital selves. There's a digital version of us out there in cyberspace, and it's an important part. It's an important way in which we are perceived by corporations, by governments, by every actor in cyberspace. They see us through this digital self, and this self exists in a landscape that has been created largely by private corporations. The people who control these selves, who own these selves, who can describe it, own our information, are private corporations: Facebook, Google, all the big companies. Governments are only beginning to catch up and say, hey, we need to be a player here too. We need to, regulate how this information is used, how people's digital selves are manipulated, or, people try to control us on the internet. People try to seduce us to buy things. People try to change how we behave. And it's a very important part of who we are, and there is a power dynamic, and I guess this is where it relates to journalism, where journalism is kind of traditionally has been seen as an actor that regulates power between civil society and governments. And there isn't that layer in cyberspace. We are, as individuals, we are largely left to ourselves. This is a world that is very much like what the world would look like if private companies had their say, had power. And so I guess that's why we're here discussing this topic, because there isn't that regulatory body. There isn't a way for people, there aren't ways that are established for people to assert their independence, to assert their power. And we're only beginning to devise those mechanisms now. And there are a whole range of ideas, and I think Thitirat has something to say about that.
Whoa, that was quick. Okay, wait, let me also phrase another question towards you, and to touch on that. In our region of the world, Southeast Asia, in ASEAN specifically, we've seen countries surrounding us introduce these laws to combat the rise of these digital platforms. For example, Singapore has introduced a fake news law that some are accusing of being a bit draconian. Cambodia has done the same. Myanmar's legislating that. Laos, Vietnam, we don't even have to talk about it because of the way their government is set up. Is this something that is concerning to you as a legal expert, and should Thailand follow suit?
Yes, of course. I think digital world, before we talk about media, yes, I agree that we should talk about digital landscape first. And I think digital world has been problems for lawmakers, for lawyers, for states, let's say state law, for many decades already. Like the engineer in the states even declare before 30 years ago, if someone follow like the history of internet, that internet is a space without state law, that will go beyond state law, which right now, if we look at the internet today, we know that it's not true, right? You know that there can be geo-blocking, the way that China treats the gateway, control the companies working in the country, and also ask the private company to cooperate with the government to control the behavior of people, and maybe even in much better manner, in much intruding methods by using the power of private companies. Yes, so I think this change of digital landscape is something very concerned for lawyers, for lawmakers, and for the rise of new laws, especially in this region. I agree. They are the desire of these states trying to guard their power. Because if you think about law is always about territory. So the jurisdiction of the power of law can be enforced only within the border. And then when you look at the internet, there's no border there. That's how internet always a problem for lawmakers and for the country. But the problem here is that if each country enforce too much strict law in their own jurisdiction, the way out for business or for private companies is not to invest in that country or just jump over. But on the other hand, we also have the attempt from the other side of the world, the Western side, especially EU, trying to enforce the new law on digital privacy. So basically saying that if your country has no sufficient level of data protection, personal data protection, you can't do business with EU. you can't get EU citizens as your customers. And people want to comply with that law because you want to do business with EU, basically. So then this is how, so one thing that I want to connect to what you said before is the law today is not enforced only through state mechanism. It is enforced through business, through private company. So we don't want people to cyberbully each other. We don't want people to post inappropriate photos on Facebook. What we do, we ask Facebook to restrict, to change the community rules, the so-called community rules, which we ask again, which community, which country's community, because some policy Facebook enforce, for example, the real name policy, which is with a good intention to protect people, to protect minors who want to use Facebook, who might be stolen identity, right? Their identity might be stolen. But that responds to the needs of mostly Western users. But when the real name policy is used in many Asian or African countries, that becomes very dangerous for political activists, for social activists as well.
Okay, let me, thank you for that. Let me change gears slightly here and ask Voranai. So traditionally, media is dominated by newspapers and terrestrial TV stations. Do you think with the rise of the internet and the fact that everyone has access to it and everyone can create their own website, the changing landscape actually helps people like you that are trying to start media companies to compete with these legacy sort of institutions like the Bangkok Post and the Nation?
Let me answer that this way, and with apologies, this is going to take a long time. When I got a mic in my hand, it's very difficult to take it out of my hand. Let me start by saying something like this. Once upon a time, the function of the media was supposed to be to check the power, to balance the power. Whose power? The powerful. The government, big businesses, so on and so forth, checking the power. But that's not the case anymore. These days, not all of media, but definitely many of the mainstream established media, whether in the West, whether in the East, especially in places like China, what do? They serve the interest of the powerful. They collude with the government, they collude with big businesses. Why do they serve the interest of the powerful? In order to manage the perception for society and shape the reality for society. Let me give you an example. If you happen to watch a media platform all day, every day, eventually your perception of the world will be that Donald Trump is the best thing to happen in America since slavery. I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about that one. And eventually, if that's your perception, the reality will be that on the next election, you will go into the booth and vote Donald Trump, thereby contributing to the reality of 4 more years of Donald Trump, because your perception has been shaped by certain media platform. On the other hand, if you watch another media platform all day, every day, your perception may become that Trump is Satan personified, the devil reincarnated, and hence shaping the reality of the next election of you going to the booth and voting for anybody not named Trump, even Joe Biden, even Oprah Winfrey, whoever, just not Trump. Perception, reality. In Thailand, if you spend all day, every day watching a certain media, shut up.
I'm gonna beep you. I'm gonna beep you.
This is about to get good. You spend all day, every day watching a certain media platform, naming no names, the Nation. After a while, your perception will be that Prayut is the best and most loyal person ever to be born in the kingdom of Siam since Pantai Norasingh told King Sura, just cut my head off. Did I make some people nervous in here? Do we know our history? And thereby shaping the reality of the next election, you're going to vote for Prayut, and hence 4 more years of Prayut. Because at the same time watching that channel, you will develop the perception that Thaksin should be hated and Thanathorn should be afraid of. By the same token, if you watch another media platform, naming no name, Voice TV, your perception might be that Prayut is the stupidest, most retarded person in Thailand, if not on earth. And the only way to save Thailand is bring back Thaksin. And hence come next election, who would you vote for? Thaksin or one of his nominees. The conclusion is the media, at least many of the established one, the traditional one, no longer check the power of the powerful, but instead they serve the interest of the powerful by managing the perception and shaping the reality of us all in this room. And hence, digital disruption to me is a wonderful thing. There are more choices, there are more options. We are no longer being spoon-fed by the powerful and their allies and their cronies. Any one of us can offer our opinions, express our thoughts, do our own research, write a blog, do a video, so on and so forth. Cod just started a media platform. I'm about to start a media platform. That would never have been possible without digital disruption. It requires too much money. I would have to buy that printer from the Bangkok Post that they are selling. So thank God for the internet. So we have more options. And of course, with options come fake news. Fake news are everywhere. But then again, what is fake news? To most people, fake news are news that I don't agree with. In Thailand, we have a center established to combat fake news. And that center is established on behalf of people who give out most of the fake news. So what is fake news? It's difficult to define. But the point of the matter is, in the world that we live in, with the new landscape, with the disruption, we have options, we have choices, we can choose, we can check our sources, we can check the information, and we can have our voices. And this scares the bejesus out of the people in charge more so than anything. That's why the fake news center, and that's why everything else my colleagues up here have been discussing. They are scared shitless. And hopefully, Cod is making them scare even more, and when I launch, I'll make them scare even more. That's all I have to say for now.
Okay. While I mostly agree with what Voranai is saying, let me play the devil's advocate for a second. What you're saying is right. Tech disruption allows us, all of us here, to consume medias in ways that we have never before. It allows us to pick and choose where we consume our media. But Anjan and I were talking about this on Friday. With this freedom, instead of choosing neutral sources of information, if such a thing exists, instead of trying to get the whole picture from both sides, the rise of social media has relegated all of us, myself included, and I'm not special here, myself included, to consuming news from safe spaces, from consuming news from echo chambers that we agree with. No longer do we seek out critical sources of information that challenges our worldview, but we consume the media that we're most inclined to agree with because that makes us feel better. How do we combat this? How do we fight this? How do we, as people who are in the business, make sure that people are not just relegated to their safe space, but they challenge their worldviews as well? We talked about this before, and you had some thoughts, so we'll start with Anjan.
Yeah, I have some very nascent thoughts, but yeah, I think essentially what Cod's saying is true. I think social media allows us, again, that digital self, that digital version of us can exist in a world, in a society online that is very tailored, that we can craft to a far greater degree than we do in the real world. In the real world, I might have my views, I might choose my friends who, choose friends who share my views, agree with me largely because it makes me feel better. But I do encounter people with other views. I'm forced to exist in spaces and converse with people who have other points of view, and that is an important part of my existence online. That interaction is not so prevalent or not so common, and I can design it out. And companies allow me to design it out because, again, it makes me feel better, and I'll spend more time with that company. And so I do think there is a role for regulation here. The way I like to think about it is I think there should be online, there should be a requirement to, for me to spend time in parties, for example, on Facebook parties. My feed should be infiltrated for certain periods of time by people with views that I might not necessarily agree with, and I can choose to friend them or not, and then after a while they'll leave my feed, but maybe some of them, the ones I choose, will stay, just like at a real party. So something like this, I think, people should be kind of regulated or enforced or something, because otherwise it's too easy for me to design a utopia. And I think this touches upon a broader question. I think another kind of thought that I had from making this series about the coded world that we live in is that the digital world is so seductive and so pleasurable, and it's designed for that, or we can choose to navigate it in that way, that I began to worry that many of the questions that we face in the real world, questions about our climate, our environment, nature, hard questions that we need to confront, will become a nuisance and annoyances, and that we might just choose, in the face of all those concerns, to spend our time in digital utopias. And this is very worrying. Now, these digital utopias have their uses. I'm skipping topics here, but for example, I met one person I met was a disabled person in Pennsylvania who started this community called Able Gamers. And 35 million people, disabled people, spend most of their lives online because they find the real world too harsh, too judgmental. People are constantly making them feel lesser human beings. And so they spend most of their time online playing video games or in online spaces, hanging out, because they told me, I met one of the founders, one of the creators of this community, he said, we feel like regular human beings here. We feel valued, we feel cared for, we can maintain human relationships, build them. And so this digital utopia has its uses. It's important for certain people to live more complete and more human lives. But on the other hand, the flip side of that same coin is that we might not feel the urgency to confront many of the issues that face our society and our species today. So our relationship with both the digital world and our natural world are equally important. And we need to kind of ask the right questions about what our relationship should be with both those worlds.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I actually have something to add there. When you mentioned that this might be a place where a regulator or law should have role. I have once talked with Yahoo Japan, which is the only one Yahoo, I think, almost surviving in the world right now. And they are in Japan, they're playing as news distributor. So many people in Japan right now still go to Yahoo Japan to check their news as the first resource. And I ask them about how do they work on the issue of echo chamber exactly. And what they told me what they're doing is trying to put a contrast view. Of course, it's each person will see different page because it's customized due to the preference of each person behavior on online that they collected from cookies, right? But what they add on that is, for example, if this person love one a little bit leftist newspaper, they will add the other side on the same page. So to make people feel that there are some other views, which so I asked them, is this something as like the rules or the regulation imposed from the government, or is there any common understanding between the internet website that they would do this? They said no. It's just because their own policy that they feel like they don't want people to stay in their own world. And this is, I felt that this is very important spirit of journalism. Even though Yahoo Japan does not view itself as media, it views itself as digital platform. But I think this spirit is very, very important for journalists today. Of course, if you present one-sided oriented view, then you can attract more of audience on that side. But at the same time, you're losing the other audience, the other types of audience as well. So first, I think that kind of spirit for journalists is very important. Second, many people, including many lawmakers in this region, trying to say that law should intervene to stop fake news, to stop misinformation, disinformation. But like you said, most of the time, fake news are something that the lawmakers or the government do not like, right? So we have this, the problem of who control the definition of fake news and who will check the checker, right? So, but one solution that might be there is to bring the transparency of algorithm. This is one solution proposed by, of course, by EU and by many international NGOs as well, that people, it's freedom of people to choose to stay in their echo chamber. And we do it like this from even before the internet era. We choose the newspaper that we like to read, right? We choose to subscribe to some services or some book club that we like. So we don't go to the community that we don't like because it's not comfortable. So why do we have to deprive that freedom from people? We don't need to, but we need to make people aware of this echo chamber that exists, not because of our own choice, but because of the algorithm. So to make sure that this algorithm is transparent enough. So the problem today is algorithms are all in hands of big tech, giant tech, and they do not review how they experiment with this algorithm to keep people on their page. And yes, this might be the solution, but I'm not quite sure how far we can go and force tech companies to review, because the algorithm is also the main source of their benefit, of their interest as well.
Can we stay with you for a second? Do you think that legislation should be a last resort when it comes to fake news? It's the final the last solution that should we resort to.
I think legislation should be the last resource for anything relating to freedom of expression.
So do you think with something like this, now this is open to everyone, instead of relying on legislation, instead of asking corporations to sort of govern themselves, I think digital literacy is something that we don't talk about enough as a society, where people, not even just kids from an early age, but even adults, because some of the worst fake news sharers are in my family and they're way over 40. But it's something that should be taught to everyone, and it's something that everyone should be aware of, not only in terms of what media you consume and what bias they may have, but how to find legitimate sources of information and how to go forward with choosing those things. Do you think this is something that should be taught in schools from an early age? It should be like a core class?
Yeah. Let me clarify on what I answer you a little bit. I think legislation that force or ban the contents in concerning contents should be the last resort, only for the most dangerous one. For example, the expression that urge someone to kill the others. So those are the expressions that should be covered or should be governed by law. Apart from that, I think legislation or law should facilitate the check and balance, should facilitate the digital literacy, should facilitate the debate. So for example, if there's a news coming in, and then if the government go and ban or label that news as, this is fake news, you should not listen to this. And then people won't go and debate about this news anymore, right? And then how can we learn by ourselves what is the right news or what is the right thing to hear? So that is one thing. The other thing, so yes, for your questions, I agree that for digital literacy, it is something that we have to teach, we have to learn from school, and I don't think like in a very early stage in that sense. And another reason why legislation should be the last resort, it is because of the digital structure today as well. For example, in the past, if a government would like to ban to ban a news article, what they would do, they would call the editor or they would call the news agency to take down or to ban that or to go to arrest that journalist directly, right? Right now, because contents online are produced everywhere, the way that government can regulate or can stop news or stop contents online effectively, it has to go under the structure. So it has to close the website, which means closing the other contents, which should not be banned as well. So I think this is why the legislation should not be on the top list when we think about how to regulate the digital contents.
Thank you. Voranai, as someone who's going to be an editor of a news platform, how do you make sure that your content just isn't safe space content for one side, but is critical of all sides? What steps, what safeguards do you put in place to make sure that you're fair and balanced?
There is no step, there is no safeguard. You read it, you consume it, and if you see it, you tell me about it. That's the most honest answer I can give. But just to go back to the fake news things a little bit, let me give you an example. About 3 days ago, a young lady, she was told by a friend, and that friend told her that he heard a story about a Chinese tourist who fell face first and died in Suvarnabhumi airport. When she heard that, she got so nervous and excited and scared, and she thought the best thing she could do is to tell the world about it. So she tweeted. A few hours later, she found out that it did not happen. It was just a rumor. So she deleted her tweet. However, it was too late. Somebody captured a screenshot of her tweet, and some way, somehow, it went into the hand of the Department of Digital Society and Economy. And so they got a search warrant. They went into her home. They searched her home. They brought her back to the Department of Digital Economy, and the minister himself interrogated her. After which, they organized a press conference in which she was forced to apologize to the great kingdom of Siam for this fake news. Which is the greater sin? A woman who made a mistake because she got too excited, or the Department of Digital Economy that went to such length as to intimidate and force this woman to humiliate herself in public. Social media is young, and with anything young, there are growing pains. We are getting used to it. We are learning from it. I'm going to be optimistic and go way out on a limb to say that most people have common sense. But also most people get a little too excited. We love the click like. We love the shares. We love the emoji. I love them. That's why I Instagram all the time. If I don't get at least 100 likes on a picture of me topless doing Muay Thai, I can't sleep at night. It feeds the ego. We're human. So there are growing pains with social media. So if the question is where's the line with fake news, I say don't worry about it. We'll learn and grow, we'll correct ourselves, and the rest is just the flaw of being human. There's good and bad in everything. But under no circumstance should the powerful abuse their power just by using the convenient excuse of fake news.
I think there's a lot to agree with in that statement. We're about 20 minutes from, so we're going to open it up to questions, but we're going to continue our discussion up here. But if you have a question, just raise your hand. We'll try to get a microphone to you so you can ask us things. So let's go with that. We'll continue. All panelists here. Legislation, obviously, we've heard, is the last possible step. Do you think that, in that case, any speech should be regulated, or should anything go? Even hate speech, incitement to violence, even those things should be covered under free speech law. Obviously, the European Union and the United States differ a lot when it comes to interpretation of this, with the United States really valuing their First Amendment, which includes a right not only to incite violence, but to be racist and be full of hatred, whereas the EU very much so regulates racist and hate speech. And in Germany, things that are like, that mention the Nazis or the Third Reich. So they're very differing approaches. I just want to know personally which is the right course of action.
All right.
Well, it's open to the floor.
I can say, as an author, certainly I appreciated the American approach, which I don't believe allows you to incite violence.
It doesn't allow you to incite violence, but you can be as racist as you want.
Correct. But I mean, well, it has certain free speech protections, as in particular, when you're speaking or writing or publishing about a public figure. The law assumes that the public figure has access and power to be able to challenge what you say, and so the bar is much higher to prove that the journalist or writer defamed them, and for the powerful person to win damages. Which is why also we're seeing, from my speaking to lawyers, we're seeing more cases in the Me Too movement in the States and not in, say, Britain or the United Kingdom or other places, because in these other countries, the powerful person, if they win the case, they can then come after you for defaming them and win huge damages. Whereas in the States, the plaintiff, the ordinary citizen is protected against that. So certainly I appreciated that. I guess to your question about fake news and kind of the discussion here, I agree with Varun. Like, I don't think it's something, I think we're overly worried about it. I think, as we all know, fake news has always existed. For me, what's more concerning is the fact that people are willing to believe fake news. And that, for me, speaks to lack of trust with authority. And that I see across the world now. Maybe digital disruption is part of that. But I think people are less inclined. People don't trust, sources of power, governments, and things like that.
And the media.
And the media.
Yes. It's a failing. I think it's a failing of the media that fake news has become so prevalent because the media has lost public trust to some extent.
Absolutely. And this is, about 5 years ago, I wrote. This is after I'd practiced journalism for about 10 years. I've been a journalist for about 15 years. I wrote an article that criticized how international news was conducted, how it was collected, how it was published, particularly in relation to Congo, where I was working at the time. There are many colonial aspects of news, how it's produced, and how it's consumed that people aren't really aware of. And so I wrote a piece in the New York Times. It was an opinion piece, and a lot of the journalists I respected came back to me and retweeted it and said, Anjan's got a point here. But oh my God, I got so much trolling, so much hate mail. I got messages from fellow journalists who said, next time we're in a war zone and you need help, we'll see about that. Like really, really nasty things. And then, so I called a good friend of mine, who's been a journalist for a long time, won a Pulitzer and all that. And I was like, what's going on? And he said, oh, nobody told you journalists don't criticize each other. It's an unwritten rule, unspoken rule. And I was like, I've been doing this for 10 years, nobody told me. Like, it's crazy. And how can we involve as the media, as journalists, if we're not allowed to, criticize each other and call each other out about our own failures?
I couldn't agree more. If there's another anecdote that, if I may, even though I'm the moderator, I have the mic, so I get to be dictator for a little bit. I was in the United States when was Trump elected? 2016. So this must have been 2015 during the election cycle, or maybe early 2016. I was back in the United States, and I was reading New York Times coverage of the flyover, which is what they call the areas that vote for Trump. And I was watching some CNN coverage of people going into a small town in Iowa and talking to the people there. And I thought, this looks really familiar. Why is this so out of place for me? But why does it look so familiar at the same time? And I finally realized how they were treating small town Iowans and how the New York Times was treating its coverage of basically the Rust Belt was how the Western media treated the Third World. Like, they're going into this area pretending that these people are like an alien race. You have to describe everything, this small provincial town in the middle of the United States with a people with a certain view, and they're explaining every single thing, and you're just like, this kind of media coverage has existed for over 60 years. The people of the global south have developed to a certain extent. Perhaps it's time that we introspect as English media and perhaps cover the news in a certain way, and maybe that'll start bringing back trust within the media, because the distrust stems not only from how they portray the global south, but also how they portray themselves when they don't exist in this intellectual echo chamber that exists in DC, in London, in New York, in LA. That everything outside of those echo chambers becomes alien, becomes part of the global south in and of itself. And that's something that we as a profession have to work on, I believe. We have a question, finally. Sorry, I'm interrupting Voranai, but we do have a question. Do we have a microphone? Thank you. That's a phone.
Thank you. It's been very interesting. I would like to ask you all, if you had a course to teach on digital literacy for all of us, what would it look like?
He's the only lecturer on the stage these days. Oh no, both of them are lecturers, so we'll leave it to them. The educated.
So I actually have the digital literacy section in one of the general education course that I engaged in Thammasat actually. So I think there are two things in that session, but it can be more expanding, right? First thing is about the technology. One of my engineer friend taught in that session, and what he said is digital literacy is like digital hygiene. So just like when you teach kids that when food fall down to floor, you don't pick and eat it. In the same thing, that you don't do something that will create risk. So first teach about technology, teach about the risk, and this is not only about media, right? It's about communications. It's about manner as well. So that's one thing. The other is media literacy, just in the same as media literacy in other contexts, not only in digital context, and then link that to the technology knowledge. So that's what I did in that short session, but it can be more. Yeah.
I teach global media industry and political communication at Thammasat University, and it depends on the class. I have different themes. And when we talk about journalism, including digital media, so on and so forth, I teach this one key word: distrust. Trust no one, which is easy for me. I grew up in Texas. We have a culture of not trusting anybody, not big government, not big businesses, not big media, not anybody. That's why we have so many guns in our home, because the only thing you can rely on is an automatic assault rifle. That's it. So the same thing applies to the media, digital or not. Whatever information you see, you look at it with skepticism. You read it, you consume it, then you ask questions of the why and the how. And then you check your source. It's difficult, I know, but that's the world that we live in. It's hard work, I know, but that's the world that we live in. That's why I also tell my student, if you can prove me wrong on anything, I'll give you an A. No one has done it yet. Not because I have never been wrong. I'm sure I've been wrong many times. I got women telling me that every day. But because Thai students still are too afraid to stand up and speak out. But that's another issue. To answer that question is really, you got to nurture a strong, healthy culture of skepticism.
We have a gentleman in the middle row that wanted to ask a question. Can you raise your hands and the mic will find you? And then we have a gentleman in the blue shirt and a young lady in the coat thing on their head.
It strikes me that fake news is one of the less interesting and significant issues raised by virtuality, in fact. And in this, I think Voranai is right. Fake news has already existed, always existed. It's really just news you believe to be untrue. It's easy to spread, but it's not a new phenomenon. It seems to me if we were to focus on the real challenges of disruption and the malign aspects of that caused by digitality, there are other issues to focus on. So Voranai, you gave a spirited, sort of unalloyed defense of the virtues and benefits of the breaking of a monopoly on news production. Seems to me that sort of narrative was dominant about 10 years ago, but we've now moved on to begin to see some of the real perils and dangers. One, for example, is the fact that you may produce what you wish, but it's the platforms, which are large private corporations, will play a decisive role in deciding what you in fact see. And as you mentioned, Anjan, Thitirat, they have their algorithms and their propriety and so on. It's they who effectively control access. So it's private corporate power. So what's going on there? They have an interest in maximizing the time you spend on your screens. You're more likely to get your tweet or your Facebook post or whatever seen lots of times if it's intemperate in its views, if it expresses outrage or extremism of some kind, and anger. So one consequence of that is that the discourse becomes more polarized. It becomes more polarized even as people are moving into echo chambers. Second consequence is it gives new tools to authoritarian states that, if they wish, can now see what you are looking at, see whom you are sharing it with, what you are saying about it. So rather than being liberation technologies, they're becoming technologies of controls. They're real worries, it seems to me, unresolved policy issues to explore here.
Maybe I have one example to add on to that, how tech are powerful in this context. In early year of the internet, we had a case, some of you might have heard of, between the French government, the French prosecutor, and Yahoo auction. So because in Yahoo auction you can buy Nazi goods, which are actually prohibited from selling in France and many other European jurisdictions. So in France, there were a guy representing Jewish community challenged this Yahoo auction and trying to say that this is wrongful in France, and French court agreed with them. So they told Yahoo to take down that page, to do whatever they can to block French citizens from seeing that page. And in that year, Yahoo took that case as, stupid lawmaker, stupid French court trying to do something that doesn't understand about the nature of internet. So, and internet should be a free place. That's what Yahoo said. And then 3 years later, Yahoo wanted to get to enter into Chinese market, and Yahoo signed a memorandum with the Chinese government that it will send information that the Chinese government wants. And then there was a guy who is a journalist. So he sent information to a journalist friends in the U.S. about the Tiananmen, the effort of Chinese government to stop any posts about Tiananmen. So it was like in those days that we didn't know much about how the Chinese government would do with internet. And then the only mistake that he did was to use Yahoo Mail to send this information. And then, of course, Yahoo sent this information to the Chinese government, and he was arrested. He was in jail for 10 years after that. So this is, we know we hear about this story all the time, but at the same time, if you live in a country where laws are quite restrictive, rather than going to ask government to change their law, we go to ask the tech companies to enhance more encryption to protect our information rather than to ask the government. So this is very dilemma for both media and also civil society at the same time.
We have one question here, one from the young lady there, and one from you as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, mine is going to be in the form of a comment, and then
Comment.
I think one of the things that you said about Yahoo Japan giving both sides of the coin, but I think in my observation, human beings in general can be, for the purpose of this discussion, can be in two categories, right? Those who like to engage with things that we are comfortable with, or those we saw in the news, we only read news that confirms to our narrative. And on the other hand, are people who like to engage with things that we do not believe in, or we does not fall to our narratives. So in my observation, I feel the majority of people fall in the first category. Very few people actually engage with things. So this news is something that I'm uncomfortable with. Let me try it. How many of us actually do that? Right? So I would like you to, as people who are experts in the media, to respond to my comment. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's why I say it is still freedom of people, right? So I'm not saying that we are 100% free to choose to stay with the news that we like, but of course there are the availability of sources, the availability of media in your region, how far you can be. I mean, even though you want to read something challenging, but if such things are not available in your region, in your local, you can't read it. Anyway, so it's not 100% freedom, but still, you are the one who chooses to stay with the comfortable things or to challenge yourself. But in the digital context, you are not the one who chooses. The one who chooses are the algorithm, the private company algorithm, which you never know, you never understand how does it work. So the movement today is to make it your right to request for the revealing of algorithm, which already established as a right in the European context, but we're not quite sure how far it can be enforced.
Can we get all the questions in one go, and then we'll sort of try to address them all?
Okay,
So,
I'll try to be quick. First question is that the world we live in allows a lot of variety of media. It can be like it can be a personal blogger, or it can be an established media outlet. For that, I feel like there's a lot of competition for attention, as you all know, and that inadvertently requires a lot more repetition, per se, of reporting, which results in re-victimization of victims, of survivors, not victims, and re-traumatization. So how do we go about and prevent that from happening? Let's say for Rohingyas, that happens a lot. One woman in particular was interviewed 27 times about how she was sexually assaulted, and no one can imagine how that must be hard for her. Second question, sorry, I'll be quick. The other one is about tech companies. So how do we actually go about and regulate them, since their community standards is not even developed? Their community standards on terrorism, for example, is being developed, and they can't even recognize the importance of distinction between state terrorism and non-state terrorism. They still treat, let's say, Al-Assad as a state, and they still treat other groups as terrorist groups. And how do we go about and actually enforce their community standards to be in compliance with international human rights law?
They're starting to go like this to me, but we're going to go over. So, your question, please.
Okay.
Can we continue without you? Yes, 5 minutes, she says. Question.
Mine is just actually as a teacher. So you guys talk about schools and how important they are in teaching digital literacy. And I think that as teachers, we often talk about the fact that they should question all the information that they read. But with algorithms that are feeding them a specific thing, how can you get around actually opening their mind to different things? Because when they read the internet, they get the same message over and over and over again.
Okay. Yeah, he's going to say something and then run because he has to go. So you'll address one of those.
Whichever one you want. I wanted to comment on your question about the regulating the companies, which has come up a few times. I think a more promising, firstly, I think the GDPR, the EU regulation for privacy, I think has become something like a joke. I don't read it, nobody reads it, everyone just clicks because we want to get to the content. And it kind of comes up at the most inopportune time, the sort of, do you agree with all these privacy, this long list of things? No one cares. So it's become kind of pointless. It doesn't protect anyone, which was its purpose. Maybe at some level it does, but sorry. The point about regulating the companies, I think trying to ask for transparency of the algorithms, I don't think will be as fruitful as I think providing some kind of journalistic mechanism to interrogate the algorithms. And I proposed this recently at an AI conference, and so I know people are thinking about it, but there's a sense that for algorithms that impact the public in a serious way, say Google's search algorithm, there should be some percentage of that algorithm's computing power that should be made available to the public, to civil society groups, to journalists, to however you design that representation of civil society, to interrogate the algorithm and check, for example, if it has bias on gender, on race, on whatever. So because that algorithm is now serving the public, and so the public should be aware and be able to check that it is serving in an equitable and reasonable way. And so I think that is a form of accountability that companies and corporations might be more amenable to, where they don't have to reveal their proprietary, profit-making algorithm, but still society gets the benefits that it needs. So maybe I can just end on that. Yeah.
Okay. One question in the back. I don't know if we have time for it. Yeah. Okay. Quick.
I just want to know.
Anjan's going to leave us. We're going to go over time.
Well, what language are your media platforms in? Are in the
English. We're all in English.
No Thai?
Unfortunately, we're annoyingly foreign.
Do you think that'll give you enough audience to generate what you need to?
That is a long conversation that we can have. That's
okay. Thank you.
Gwen is getting us to get. Go. No, just go. Okay. To answer your question, anyone want to? Can I take a crack at it, even though I'm not a panelist?
No, wait. Sorry.
No. If you have.
No. Everybody's about to leave. We all want to go, but before you go, one most important thing: do not leave this room without this. It will be different in your life. Okay? THISRUPT. Disrupt.
He's
Not
advertising
DSI.
his platform.
Not DSI, but THISRUPT. Disrupt. You search it now, you're not going to find anything. But it will pop up in your face due to algorithm. Thank you.
Okay. As a moderator, I'm not going to plug my thing, but you can search it somewhere, I'm sure. His film will be
we'd like to
next door on Code. Okay.
We're screening the documentary now next door, and he's going to say a little bit more about the power of code, right, Anjan?
Okay, excellent.
And then we can do
To answer your
questions
question,
here for anyone who wants to stay.
The Rohingya thing is just one terrible example. You remember the cave? You remember the kids that were trapped in the cave? Yeah. There was like 1 million journalists knocking down the doors of those parents and their homes the moment they got their kids back. It's a terrible thing that our profession does. I wish there was a better way to regulate it. I don't have the answer to that. What was your second question? How do we regulate Facebook? I wanted to tell this anecdote, but I didn't have time. Anyone who knows what the Anti-Defamation League is? It is a civil society group in the United States that protects, that fights against anti-Semitism, which is the hatred of Jews. In 1978, when a town in Pennsylvania was trying to regulate against the Ku Klux Klan, saying that the Klan cannot rally here because they are racist and they're anti-Semitic, and they're, just a terrible blight upon humanity. The first group that went to defend the Klan's right to hold their rally was the Anti-Defamation League. I don't know about these two, but the most important thing in the world is your freedom to speak, the freedom of speech, and even the freedom to listen to people who disagree with you on a very fundamental genetic level, and that's what I really believe. To answer your question, email any of us. We'll help you come up with some coursework for your kids. Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for a great panel. Thank you, Jakapong Villa. Have a good, go to the other panels, go get food, whatever you need to do. Thank you.
So I'd like to encourage everyone to go next door